conversation on the fiscal considerations in reopening our schools. I'm Tasha Davenport. I'm the Deputy Executive Director and Chief Operations Officer here at CSBO. I'm joined today, literally in the room here, by Sarah Baches. Sarah is our Chief Governmental Relations Officer for CSBO. And then we have a wonderful guest, Eric Dill. Eric is our Northern Section President for CSBO, and more important is the CBO for Santa Clara Unified, with just a great long history and experience in this role. So Eric, thank you for joining us today. It's going to be a lively conversation as we hear from our members, so thank you. As we get started, I just want to kind of frame up the conversation with really, first, I guess, a compliment to both our Legislative Advocacy Committee, our governmental relations team, and our leader members. Because of the quality of work that they do, we have been invited into a number of conversations over the past few months with really key conversations around education. One is with the governor's office. That was a nightly call where we were really trying to better inform some of the executive orders that were coming out, asking for general considerations like simplicity, like help us remove some of the complexity, but mainly with the role of informing our policymakers and of the complexities and interdependencies and challenges that we face in education. So that was one group of calls. The second is, and we're actively involved in this now, is with the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman. We've had about 30 organizations, including our labor management groups, involved in this whole conversation around restarting schools. And again, the same aim is just to provide a tone of reality, kind of moving the conversation from theory to practicality of what it's really going to take. And we are the only group that can provide that information. It would be wonderful if we had some direction coming, but I think just as the shutdown, like a flick of the switch, it will be upon us to decide when and how we reopen. I don't think we're getting an executive order around that. So that's another group, was the SPI group. And then the third is the management group. We are also in really a tight agreement with them that our role at this point is to continue to inform the realities of these decisions. And that group is with CSBA, CSESA, the Small School Districts Association, and AXA. And so again, because of the great work that we've always done, we're at the table. Every conversation, once it moves from the students and learning and safety, comes down to budget, transportation, child nutrition, maintenance and operations. And that's where we've spent our time in this past week, having conversations and being informed by more than 700 members participating at this point. So, kind of just starting there. In light of, and Eric's going to spend a minute on this with you, but in light of the announcement last night around the budget, I think just a couple of thoughts before we jump into the agenda. It is easy to get overwhelmed, and we absolutely understand that. We do not have answers as we sit here today. Answers are going to come from us. Answers are going to come from the field, informing our constituents, our policymakers, if you will. But also, again, we're not going to have a unified opening order coming out. I think that's going to be for us to determine at that local level. So it's very easy to get overwhelmed. But what I kind of found myself taking a little bit of comfort in was that this state needs us. When we talk about a $54 billion gap, the state needs us to reopen the schools so that the adults can go back to being employed. And so in some odd way, it creates certainly a pressure for us, but it also it presents an opportunity for us to be the most candid we ever have around what this is really going to take. And I think that that's the spirit and kind of the fight that we have in us right now as we face this reality ahead. So really, again, today, without without having answers, what we are interested in doing is exploring with you the options that you're looking at, some folks are looking at starting students in the morning, flipping classrooms, moving to the afternoon for the second session. Again, huge impacts on maintenance and operations and all of those considerations. Others are looking at, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for one group, Tuesday, Thursday, that kind of thing. Some of our global partners, as they've restarted, have moved those younger students in first so they could get those parents back to work, those parents that, unfortunately, to use the term, look at education as a part of their childcare solution. So they're moving the youngers in first and then focusing on those older grades. So what we want to do is understand maybe some of those options that you're looking at and some of the questions that you have around the topics that we've got listed here, with the aim that we will want to get answers for you, use that information to impact some of the decision making across the street, and thirdly, to flip that information back to you in terms of best practices and tools as we start to see some continuity, knowing that we could have 1,100 different versions of this, right? Every district is going to do what they need to do at the local level. We're not expecting one size fits all, but we do expect that we'll have some best practices and maybe some thoughtful considerations that we haven't considered before. We then intend to take the information that we capture from this conversation and the others that we've had with every single discipline in the business operations group and develop those into buckets, right? What does policy and funding need to look like? The continuity of learning, the conditions of learning, and then leadership and planning. Those are the buckets that we're working through as we turn this information back to you aggressively over the next few weeks. And not starting today, this has started a long time ago, as mentioned, but continue the advocacy for funding. We've got the rainy day fund sitting out there. Who gets that? I'm not great at math, but if we have a $18 billion gap on our Prop 98, we have a $16 billion rainy day fund. Boy, so how do we get the funding? What are the regulatory areas that we need relief and flexibility on? And these will continue to be really big challenges for us in the weeks and months ahead. So that introduction of just what we're trying to accomplish today, I really want to turn the floor over to Eric Dill. Again, Eric, thank you for joining us today, and we really appreciate your perspective and experience. Having been through this before and sitting in this role, what does this look like for us as you join us today?
Okay, thank you, Tasha, and I also want to thank you for using my senior photo for the class, for the picture on the screen there. Right now, we are between response and recovery mode. In terms of responding to the needs of our community, we're honoring the shelter in place and social distancing orders while still providing, at least in my district, 40,000 meals to our families per week. And instructionally, we went from traditional classroom-based instruction to distance learning within 2 weeks. With each of those things, we get better and better every week. In terms of recovery, it's really difficult with everyone looking at the same hazy crystal ball. We want to get back to normal, but is that even going to be possible? And is going back to the way we did things before the right thing to do? So, we're asking ourselves, how much energy are we going to put into reopening school and how much energy are we going to put towards sustaining the momentum for change that's been created by this crisis? In all likelihood, when we eventually reopen, we are going to have to reinvent how we deliver instruction and all of the crucial services that we're providing to our students. And that's going to be even more challenging, especially with the news that we received this morning, with the understanding that schools will have less money to support those pivots. And so what I'm asking now of my people and cabinet is, what are we going to give up? And that's where we were in the last recession. Maybe a few weeks ago we were thinking, how can we do the same with less? But really we're talking about how can we do more with less. So as I get into recovering and reopening, and really these are just meant to be introductory comments before we open it up to the group, I'll talk about timing first and then funding and policy. So I'm sure you're all getting the same questions from your friends and colleagues about what you know about when the state and schools will reopen that I am. And I tell people I'm watching the same press conferences that you are, and the governor is not consulting with me first. I appreciated the response last week from State Superintendent Thurman and our fellow education associations that it won't be that easy when the governor suggested that we could reopen schools as early as July. I think that was met with a collective shrug. We already have the discretion to adjust our calendars, but our teachers and students are going to be exhausted and we need a break. Plus, we all just finished negotiating our MOUs with our bargaining units on the effect of the shutdown, and I don't think we want to reopen those talks to change the calendar. And with the specter of future shelter in place orders out there, I think schools are going to need the summer break to get a better handle on what a blended school year will look like and how we're going to adjust to varying degrees of in-person and online learning in a way that meets instructional standards. And we're going to be doing that in an environment where we're going to see a drop in attendance, not only from our students, but our staff from COVID concerns. So this is going to take some planning to really kick off a successful school year. On the facility side, we're doing our summer cleaning and we're going to try and seal off our indoor spaces so that we can assure teachers and staff that the indoor environment is safe when they come back. But we anticipate from the adults, from teachers and from parents, that there's going to be an ongoing expectation for disinfectants and sanitizers in classrooms, heightened custodial support, and we're going to need to address that for as far out as we can see. We think a lot about transportation. In my district, we do a lot of home to school transportation, and how are we going to manage bus stops and bus routes? That would definitely be a challenge if we've been given the all clear to open, but also at the same time maintain social distance. It's easy to do on an airplane when people are choosing to buy tickets and choosing to fly, but we can't do that. We can't spread out a busload of kids that easily. There's going to need to be adjustments in the school calendar and the school day because if we're still in that social distancing mode, because we simply can't hire twice as many teachers, build twice as many classrooms, or buy twice as many buses and twice as many bus drivers when there's a shortage. So on funding and policy, I threw out all my notes this morning when I read the Department of Finance's release. With an $18 billion reduction in Proposition 98, our already inadequate funding is going to be even less adequate. And when you realize that we are facing even greater problems, that's just going to create greater stress. So we got a little more certainty this morning, but I still have a lot of questions that I hope Sarah and Elizabeth and Tasha take forward as they're working with staff and legislators at the Capitol. So we see what the DOF is forecasting right now. We know that this is setting the stage for the May revise next week, so the governor can point back to it and say, you all read where we are headed with revenue. But my question is, how valid is that projection? And I know that they are working very hard to try and put together a May revise based on that forecast and perhaps with a lot of proposed solutions. But how much of that is going to be revisited when the legislature reconvenes in August? And is there going to be a second shoe that drops on us? So I caution districts out there that may be looking at the May revise and saying, okay, now we've been given our direction as to what the next school year will look like. I think it still could look different in August as the state tallies the personal income tax in mid-July. So we've got the expected drop in funding. It'll come with a slate of proposals. Hopefully that'll give us more flexibility in the remaining funds that we receive. But I hope that the legislature doesn't give us flexibility on things that we need to negotiate our way out of and think the job is done. For example, and again, I don't know anything what's going to be out there, but if they were to eliminate the grade span adjustment funding and say, okay, school districts, you can go and raise class size, that doesn't help us if we've got class size locked into our collective bargaining agreements, or if the summer layoff window isn't open. So simply taking the money away and saying now you've got the ability to make changes may not help us, or at least in the short term. With the possibility of students in and out of school, is there going to be a change in how we collect and report ADA? I've heard there are talks of moving to enrollment-based funding for next year, but how quickly would that make its way through the legislature, and how well thought out will that change be if we move to something based on enrollment? SB 117 goes to the end of the fiscal year, and knowing that we have a dramatic drop in state funding next year, what will the expectation be that we continue to pay employees and contractors who might not be providing services? What about food service and rolling over this year's USDA waivers into next year? A big question I have is, how will counties respond to this decrease in funding? We know their sales tax revenue will drop, and their transient occupancy tax in the cities, maybe developer fees, possibly property tax. And so I'm concerned about the teeter plan, and if there's perhaps anything that the counties might do to balance their budgets at the expense of districts who rely on the teeter plan. So to Tasha's opening remarks, when I talk to legislators, and I've had a few comments or conversations already, what I say to them is, right now more than ever, school districts are essential services, and all of our employees are providing essential services. We're providing food, we're paying, we are buying food, we're feeding our community, we are providing distance learning, we're making it possible for employees who are working remotely to have their kids taken care of, even if they're staring at a screen. But we are the stimulus this time around. Up in this area, we were the only thing that was open and running. And so if the state wants the economy to get back on track, they need to keep the schools open, and they need to keep them functioning. We've all been through this before. Just as the state is reaching into its bag of tricks, we're reaching into our bag of tricks, but we're going to have to continue to be adaptable to sustain our programs without the resources that we didn't have before, and what we're going to have a whole lot less of. So I've never felt less like an expert than right now in having to quickly respond to that memo from the Department of Finance. But I know we have a lot of smart people on the line, and I know that the community of school business officials has been networking and talking to each other now more than ever. And you're going to need to rely on your business connections and your social connections through this organization to help us all get through this. So with that, I'll turn it back to Tasha and Sarah.
Eric, thanks again, and I appreciate the vulnerability and being on the call with such a shoe having dropped last night and this morning. So again, we really appreciate your time, and there'll be questions coming in that I'm sure people would also appreciate your perspective on. Before I go to Sarah, I do want to mention that we talked to Mike Fine last night. Sarah and I got on the call with him, and he has agreed to do a webinar for us that you'll see communicated today. But the webinar, excuse me, is for next Wednesday at 9 a.m. and really digging in deeper now that we know some of these numbers on some of those implications. So please look for that invitation, and that will be again next Wednesday at 9 a.m. Sarah?
Good morning. Sarah Botches, your lead advocate. I thank you so much. This has been a roller coaster, and I don't like rides. So it's been very challenging, but our goal is really to always be your voice in these settings, and to really communicate concerns, frustrations, realities, and implications as we build really what is before us, the task of structuring plans that are workable and realistic in reopening schools. Last Tuesday, we were all shocked when Governor Newsom laid out his announcement of a 4-point plan, hoping to see schools reopen as soon as possible. And he placed schools as part of stage 2, which required a lot of components that were not mentioned. Many of the components are that the state, in order to move in this direction, has to have stabilized hospitalization trends, has to have sufficient personal protective equipment in supply to meet the demand, This is an area that we have continued to advocate from day one, is access to resources, supplies, and cleaning materials. We have been in 4 different conversations with Cal OES, the Office of Emergency Services, that's procuring the state's cleaning supplies and PPE. Our goal is to make sure that schools can access those same resources and supplies, as we know that there is a statewide and nationwide shortage on these materials. The state, in order to move in this direction, has also said that it needs to ensure testing capacity and contact tracing capacity is statewide. And all of these variants are still very much an unknown. The state is still not prepared to move in that direction. And so once we saw the full detail that as part of moving in the direction of reopening, the state has to provide a lot of structures that are yet to be in place. We were then tasked to facilitate the budget discussion for the superintendent's reopening task force. We believe that it's important to ensure we gather your feedback, your information, and have a thoughtful process. Our outcomes for these forums really are to ensure that CSBO is working in a collaborative manner, ensuring that the federal, state, and local guidance and partnership is in alignment. We are also working very diligently to mitigate any further impact on ADA loss and to push for an alternative reporting system. Two alternative structures that we have been working on is using just current year ADA count and leaving it as that, so that it's a hold harmless for an entire fiscal year, or considering enrollment at 3 different intervals with data entries to ensure that there's recognition for the fluctuation that happens at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of an academic year. We also, and our hope in all of these forums, is to ensure that the information we're retrieving creates a roadmap to reopening that recognizes the diversity of California schools, that we have small practices. With that, we will now open up the conversation to our members by requesting that you raise the little palm, says raise hand icon, to sign up to speak or comment, or feel free to enter your question in the question and answer box. Christina will moderate who speaks first. In the Q&A box, you will see today's Department of Finance fiscal update report that was referenced, in which it indicates that due to the delay in tax collections until July 15, the state is anticipating $54 billion in budget deficit, of which would affect Proposition 98 in the current and the budget year by $18.3 billion. As Eric mentioned, all of this is information that we are seeking clarification from both the governor's office and the Department of Finance, as well as this morning I spent time with the director of Assemblymember Rendon, the Speaker of the Assembly Rendon's office, to let them know that there is a long road ahead that needs clarification, needs assurance, and needs protection from the state in order to move forward. So at this time, I will turn it to Christina to let us know if there's any hands raised or any questions in the Q&A box.
Good morning, everyone. I do have some questions on the board. Very active group today. Karen Kimmel, I have you on the board. Would you like to speak to your question?
Sure, thank you. I just really appreciate how you guys are diving in with your advocacy. I understand that we don't know if there's going to be enrollment-based funding or prior year ADA funding, but I think the most urgent thing is we need a formalized action that we have flexibility on how we can go forward in planning for next year, with giving us flexibility on distance learning, shorter days, alternating days, so that we eliminate the instructional minutes and annual number of days. That, I think the sooner we can get that, the more we can actually make a plan and move forward with it. So that's my goal.
Thank you, Karen. All right, Joshua Bryant, would you like to speak to your question on USDA waivers?
Yeah, you know what? Excuse me. I appreciate you taking my question. I was just curious, as you guys mentioned earlier, the meal service, and if there's been any word that the waiver might be extended beyond what most of us might know as the summer school and even into the 2021 school year.
Hello. This is something that we are considering. Elizabeth Escabel, our senior director, is working on a federal letter on this particular topic in special education that we need additional waivers. So this is something that we'll redirect and address. And I know it was something that was raised by our child nutrition folks. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a question from Donna Thomason on charters. Would you like to speak to your question, Donna?
I just was curious if charters would be granted the opportunity to fund on prior year ADA, which they normally are not, if we move in the direction of being able to use prior ADA.
Donna, let me review SB 117. If you look at SB 117 that was passed a month ago, it had a lot of extensions through this year on ADA and reporting requirements, but let me look a little further on that for charter schools.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Sarah. I have a question on the floor from Grant. Grant, would you like to speak to your question?
Sure. Has there been any word from CTA or the other unions regarding trying to stop the August layoff window like they did the last recession?
We have heard that it's something that they've already raised to the administration, and it's something that in our nightly calls with the deputy for the governor, we have pushed back in instructing and educating them that it then curtails our ability to deal with any deferrals and further reductions that are coming. But it is something that it's always brought up by the statewide organizations.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Sarah. At this time, the floor is open.
I'll mention that this morning, as I was speaking to the executive director for the California Federation of Teachers, we were trying to devise our game plan for the budget task force under the state superintendent's request. And we're looking into every opportunity and programs that will require extensions, delays, and flexibility. We have mentioned delaying the payment increase for pensions, recognizing that the state should take on the ownership of paying for the supplies and ensuring delivery of all PPE and cleaning supplies related to COVID-19. And really having a difficult, but I think worthy conversation with our labor associations of that on this issue, we need to come together and really lobby both in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. For funding and parameters to ensure reopening. If there's any other information that we need to know that as we navigate this environment, any other fiscal implications that we need to be aware of, please let us know.
Thank you, Sarah. Robert Shevwell, I have the floor open for you.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we hear you great.
Okay, great. Well, you know, I think there's probably a pause from a lot of us just because there's just so much to digest here with inside of it. And I appreciate the concise information that you're putting forward. You know, look, I just keep looking at the slide and the bullet points. I mean, they're hitting all the areas of concern that I'm sure all the school districts in the state share. I think in talking through this, and hopefully this is, the start of many discussions through here. Time is of the essence, of course, because this would pretty much be the time where we're shutting down, and then we flip the switch to start opening up the school year, and doing all our planning there. I think some of the bigger concerns that I'd like to just kind of voice up front is the one size fits all mentality through this. It doesn't work that way in reality. I mean, I'm Yuba City Unified up in Sutter County. We are a medium-sized school district. We're the largest school district in that county, and then the remainder of them are very, very small school districts. And just the way that we all have to manage these problems and situations in that county is pretty amazing to kind of watch, and how confusing it gets to the community real fast. I mean, things like graduation at a small school district is something that can be potentially accomplished where it's almost impossible for our larger school district. I know that none of us sit in our positions to basically say no all the time, or we can't do this. We're programmed to basically say, okay, let's roll up our sleeves. How do we do this? I think, there are just some real major concerns about the dismantling of public education as we know it today. And I think we've seen that in a very, very short time, when we all kind of rolled into this mid-March, sent our students home, sent our teachers home, sent our staff home, and we're sprung into distance education learning mode. And how challenging and rocky that is. And just when maybe we're starting to kind of get a little bit of a groove there, we'll be shutting down for the year, and potentially faced with another hill to climb with a very, very different situation. And maybe we'll be able to drag along some of what we learned in this brief time of distance learning. But I think what is most concerning is that there is a real mixed message out there in the world. We're kind of left to react to legal parameters that are being placed upon us, and we're starting to see legal parameters being broken down county by county by county. So what one county may have as far as rules and regulations applied to it might be very different from another county, causes confusion. And if there isn't real clear thought from the top down as far as how this impacts or may impact many, many, many different school districts across the state, it becomes very, very challenging for us to manage and do our jobs on a daily basis. The financial implications of this are just off the charts. I mean, I'll give you an example, have switched all of our lower elementary classes to more group type learning, where we have, engagement tables that students are working within. They will not work in the COVID world. And it really kind of pushes us back to desks where we can separate kids apart. But our classrooms are now filled with collaboration tables that would just not work if we were to have to limit our classes to 50% or 25%, whatever that's going to be. So there really needs to be some thought about the flexibility around this. I feel remorse from the standpoint of, as an educator. I came up through the ranks as an educator and then moved to the business world. We put education at peril in having political decisions made that just do not align with being able to carry it off on a daily basis educationally. So sorry I spoke a lot there, but it's a very concerning subject for all of us.
Robert, thank you. I think I wrote down dismantling of public education. I think it's a very powerful statement. And, we've suddenly become linguists, right, to try to translate and understand a language that just has not been in front of us before. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. We're in absolute agreement, and we've been very vocal that one size absolutely doesn't fit all, but there has to be some rules in the playbook that we can all get our heads around, knowing that then the local flexibility obviously is important. But thank you for your comments.
Thank you. I have a question on the floor from Rabinder. Rabinder, would you like to speak to your question?
Yes, I would. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if there's a possibility of coming up with a formula in terms of reduced calendar days based on what the Department of Finance projects in terms of actual funding decreases related to a COLA. So it'd be great to plan based on that. I know we don't really know what revenue is going to come in at, but if we had a sliding scale where we could say if the COLA were to come in at -5%, this is what you should plan on in terms of reduced calendar year. If it comes in at -10%, this is what we should plan. So just trying to put something concrete around a little bit of the uncertainty that we have in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do know that Mike Fine will include in his conversation next week a conversation around COLA and again, some of the negative percentage scenarios that we're considering right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question on the floor from Latasha. Latasha, would you like to speak to your question on CTA?
Hi, I'm not sure if I can be heard.
We hear you, great.
I'm sorry. Does anyone know the talks are the position of CTA right now? Typically they have their position, they put on political pressure. So do we know what they want or what they may be asking for that we can kind of start planning for as our new reality?
I have a call-in with one of their deputies, and so far what they've signaled with all the other associations is no cuts, continue to provide COLA and special education, and that was as of a week ago prior to all the information we received the last evening and this morning, seeing this fiscal update. So my goal is to make sure to touch base with all the associations and determine, including management, to determine what are their stance and how do we coalesce towards one common voice.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions on the floor. Phil Hillman, would you like to speak to your questions? Phil?
Real quick, just on the supplemental concentration grants, I see it's been moving through the legislative committees, kind of the restrictions, so to speak. Any thoughts on whether that's going to make its way through all the way and be signed by the governor?
And that was the reason for my call this morning with the speaker's staffer. Yes, that's AB 1835 by Assemblymember Weber. This bill grant funding continues to be rolled over for those specific purposes, that there is increased reporting on the use of S&C dollars. This morning's conversation, CSBO took an opposed position given our situation. We had taken a concern, recognizing the conversations prior to COVID on equity. We determined, given this new environment, that we might have to talk about flexing even those dollars. And so that was my conversation today about educating them that at this point, it makes it very difficult to talk about restrictions when we do not know the certainty of those funds. So our goal is to ensure that that bill is halted before its next hearing. And the next step would be the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Yesterday, it was voted on in the Policy Committee, Assembly Education Committee. And so our goal is to make sure it stalls before it has another conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. I have a question on the floor from Susan Watts on teacher admin ratios. Susan, did you want to speak to your statement?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to bring up the fact that of some of the things that small school districts are struggling with. And one of those is the teacher admin ratio. So even if an August layoff window was open, we would be unable to take advantage of that because we're right at our admin ratio. And with all the challenges that we will have to have in trying to start school next year, we can't imagine doing it with fewer administrators. So, you know, we're really limited on the type of reductions that we can make and without some flexibility in that ratio calculation.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I know in our work with Tim Taylor at the Small School Districts Association, that has been a part of our calls, both with the governor's office and amongst the management group. So thank you for echoing that, and I will share that concern again with him as we talk. I believe it's this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha. And I have the floor open for Robert Shemwell. Did you have another comment?
I'm sorry, my hand just, it's something not, no, thank you.
Not to worry, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, at this time, the floor is open.
We have also included resources. As we collect information, our goal is to ensure that we're providing as much resources to all as, and our goal is to make sure that we're providing, that we continue these conversations on a weekly manner. Our contact information is here. Please feel free to contact me directly at my email, sbaches@casbo.org, under topic reopening schools. As we mentioned, this is a top priority for us. We want to make sure that your voices are heard and that all of these conversations, questions, concerns are really addressed as we move forward. We thank you for your time and service.
Thank you.